Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome once again to another edition of Beverly's Times Past. Ed Joseph's here with you this evening. And our special guest back for his second program is Mr. Michael Casale, retired Beverly High School teacher of 39 years of dedicated service. Good evening, Mike.
Good evening. Thank you.
And how are we doing now?
We're doing fine. I've been retired for 2 years, and I enjoyed my 39 years with the Beverly Public Schools.
But rumor has it, though, that you haven't had quite enough of the classroom. You're still back doing a little substituting.
I'm still back doing a little bit of substituting. That's correct, yeah. And I enjoy it. I always did enjoy working with the children. Great.
Well, you brought along your marvelous collection of postal cards here that we so much enjoyed in our first program, and we're going to get to those in just a moment. But tell us, if you will, again, how this all evolved. Like, how did you get interested in collecting postcards here?
Well, it was really quite accidental. When I first began teaching at Beverly High School back in 1957, I was teaching United States history, and I did teach that till 1970 and then moved into administration. But during that period of time, I tried to teach United States history in a different light and tried to concentrate on topics in American history as they related to the citizens of Beverly. And the children and the students at the time really seemed to enjoy it and would begin to bring things that their parents or grandparents may have had. And then we stumbled upon postcards which gave us a view into the past, and from there it just built up. We'd go to yard sales and find postcards, or people would give you postcards, and then over the years we built up this collection of postcards of Beverly from, well, I would say 1890 to maybe 1920.
It was very fashionable, was it not, Mike, to send postal cards depicting local scenes back in those days?
That was quite fashionable. There were postcards of probably every area, especially around New England. And when people would go away, even for a weekend, would find a place to get a postcard and send a postcard. The fascinating part about it, or what I found fascinating, was the fact that most of them were produced in Germany. And I think that's probably because of their development of photography and the technique of, today we call it airbrushing, but being able to remove flaws or remove parts of pictures and so on.
Such as trolley car wires.
Trolley car wires or whatever they didn't like in a picture they could remove.
Took it right out.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And they used halftones, which would give it a color effect. And that was very important. People preferred color rather than just plain black and white.
Right. Now, what do we have, or what do you have for a collection now, in total, would you say? Ballpark figure.
I probably have close to 100 different postcards of the area. And then I have another whole section of postcards, probably closer to the 200 range, of New England. Concentrating mostly in Massachusetts, New Hampshire, and Vermont.
Right. Well, in our first program, Mike, we started down at the Beverly Bridge, and we worked our way up through Cabot Street as far as the Unitarian Church, I believe is where we left off.
Yes.
And I was thinking before we started taping this second part here, part two, that even though we're not as old as we might otherwise or should be, we both have a few memories of Cabot Street, and perhaps we could just share a few of those with our viewers before we get into your collection. One of my favorite remembrances is of Ellis Square and waiting for that bus down on the Essex Street side of Ellis Square. Seeing it come around that corner, and it would pull up with the driver all decked out in his uniform and with a badge and all, and it was very, very exciting to get on that bus.
Yes, it was. I used to take the bus every day when I went to St. John's Prep, and we knew we were late. If we saw that bus turning down Winter Street, we used to run to get down to Ellis Square because that bus driver wouldn't wait for you if you weren't on that bus on time. And it was really quite a sight to see. There'd be maybe sometimes 2 or 3 buses lined up, because one would go around Ellis Square and go down Cabot Street to Elliott to Danvers, and then there would be 2 others that would head into Salem, and from Salem into Boston. So it really was quite a thing to see. It was quite a terminal, actually.
Those were the days when Ellis Square was kind of the hub of Cabot Street.
Absolutely.
Things have changed a bit at this point in time.
Yes.
And of course, there were many stores down in the Cabot Street area in the 1940s that have long since vanished, Mike.
There were, I can remember, Ross's, which was next door to where the Cabot Cinema is now. And I can always remember the root beer floats. I used to be able to go into Ross's and get this root beer float, a big glass of root beer with vanilla ice cream. Yeah. And then further on down the street, you had Brunswick Music, and I can't remember the man's name, but he had this huge loudspeaker up over the door, and he would be playing the records, of course trying to sell them, all at 78 speed. Yep. And then of course the fish market and the bakery, Cornix Rubber. I mean, everybody had to go to Cornix Rubber for their sneakers, gym shorts, T-shirts, and usually it was Mrs. Callahan that waited on them. Yeah. And
Joe Nixon had a corner market on the sporting.
That's right, he did. They used to take care of the private schools, the public schools, and I can remember in the 1950s when they had that big fire. I can remember going into the building just as the firemen were pulling out, and the brand new high school football uniforms were in the basement. Oh. And I can remember going in with Joe Nixon and myself and some of the others, taking these waterlogged boxes out of the cellar, yeah, so that the high school football team would have their uniforms for the fall. And if I remember correctly, the fire was in the summertime, and the uniforms had just come in.
Now, was this on the corner of Pond Street?
No, it was not. It was in the building that housed the National Bank and Almies, and there's a bagel shop there now and a Caboose Travel. Yep. It was then that whole building, yep, when that burned down, and Cornix was located there. After that fire, Cornix moved across the street near where that New Leaf health food store is, in that area there. Mm-hmm. And they set up temporary quarters, and then from there moved across to the corner of Pond where the bicycle shop is.
The old Marston Sturdivant.
That's right. Yeah. That's right.
Speaking of aromas and all of that, I well remember going into Ropes' drugstore, to mention one, perhaps Woolworths and W.T. Grant's, and such delicious smells, Mike, that you could ever imagine.
The best smell of all was the peanuts roasting.
Yeah, yeah.
And the long candy counter at Woolworths that seemed to take half the length of the building on Federal Street side. And we used to be able to go in that side entranceway. I went to St. Mary's School, and sometimes the nuns would give you a quarter or something to go over and buy them a bag of M&Ms or gumdrops or something, because they couldn't leave the property. They could go over to St. Mary's Church, but they couldn't go out shopping alone. Yeah. So we used to do that.
Saturday afternoon at the Larkham or the Ware Theater?
Saturday afternoon at the Larkham or the Ware. Saturday afternoon it was 16 cents. 16 cents, and you'd see from 2 o'clock in the afternoon, or actually 1, you'd probably see an hour of cartoons, a 48-part serial, which you saw 10 minutes of. The first 5 minutes were the review of the last 5 minutes from the week before, a double feature, the coming attractions, and the Pathé News. And at 5 o'clock you'd leave with a huge headache. At the Larkham Theater occasionally had stage shows. I can remember seeing cowboys and horses and things on the stage down at the Larkham Theater.
Yeah.
And prior to that, during the Second World War, you had the Strand Theater. And at the Strand Theater, for 10 cents, again, you'd go in at 1 o'clock and would last till 5. And for the 10 cents, you'd get the double feature, the cartoons, the cereal, the news, an Old Nick bar, and a comic book.
Oh.
So Saturday afternoons were
Got
taken
your
up.
money's worth.
Yeah, that's right.
In our first program, we mentioned some of the markets that were, back in those days, the Cullivan Market and the Foreign Market. And in high school, I worked at the City Hall Cash Market, which is next to the police station, Cabot Street. And I well remember those gigantic freezer lockers that were in the back there, and we had
Yes.
to pull them up with
A pulley?
pulley
Yes.
type of apparatus, you know, and you stuck your arm and they'd pull out what you want,
Yeah.
and you had a chance to lose your arm if the thing
If the thing let go.
and went down back into the
Yeah.
cellar.
I think most of us did have jobs in some sort of a grocery store. I know when I was in high school, I worked at the A&P, which was located where the Walgreens is now. And it had moved from Cabot Street down to that area in the early 1950s. But a grocery store was a good place to have a part-time job.
75 cents an hour, Mike. I
Yeah.
don't know how you fared, but
Yeah.
that was my
Well,
going rate.
when I started at my very first grocery store as a young boy, I worked at Bucci's Market on Rantoul Street at 60 cents an hour, and I couldn't believe I was making a penny a minute.
Wow.
That really impressed me,
Yeah.
a penny a minute.
Well, when you figure that gas was like 20 cents a gallon and cigarettes were just probably 25 cents, and you could get by with a paycheck
Wow.
of $15, $20 to $30 a week and, you know, live rather
Yeah.
high.
I remember when I first got my driver's license, and at the local gas station, the gas station owner told my father how generous I was. I put a quarter's worth of gas in the car, got about a gallon.
Oh, those good old days.
Yeah, I guess.
Well, let's get back here to our program's agenda here. Mike, we're going to just take about 5 minutes and review some of the pictures
Sure.
that we put on in part one.
Okay.
We started at Beverly Bridge
Yes.
in our first show. And of all the areas in Beverly, this, with the building of the new bridge that we have down there now, this has really changed, has it not?
Absolutely. When that building was first built in the 1700s, it was the longest bridge in America. I think we had mentioned that before. And it was a bridge that, it was quite a landmark. In fact, it was so important that it was one of the reasons George Washington on his tour came through the North Shore to view that bridge. And as we mentioned before, George Washington was a surveyor and was interested in building and wanted to see this structure. It didn't take them very long to build. It was a toll bridge. It was built by shareholders, and it was a drawbridge. And probably everybody can remember their fathers and grandfathers talking about how they were going to build a new bridge. And it's
Correct.
it's only within the past few years that we have actually seen the new bridge go up.
That's right. That's right. And I'm sure this one didn't take as long to build as the one that we have down there now.
No, if I remember correctly, it was within a year or so that building was that bridge was built.
Yeah. The other major change down there, Mike, is the waterfront itself with all of the pleasure boats down there. Excuse me.
Yes.
In the old days, it was a working harbor. Fishing boats were there, and later on, the coal and the oil boats would come in, ships would come in.
That's right.
But today, what you see down there is basically pleasure craft.
The pleasure boats. People have moorings and wet docks, and some people will just go down and enjoy themselves on the weekends or whatever. And many times the boats don't even leave the docks, but they do take up a vast area of the harbor. Years ago, it used to be a place to go fishing or to rent a boat, and as we saw earlier, the rowboats would be tied out in a long string. And if you wanted to rent a boat and go flounder fishing, somebody would reel in a boat and you'd rent it for half a day or an hour or whatever you wanted to rent it. Today, I don't know where you could rent a boat today if you wanted to go down and rent a rowboat. Maybe at Salem Willows, but But the harbor is taken up mostly by wet docks and, of course, all the moorings that are out in the harbor itself. So it seems to be a little more cluttered than it was earlier.
Yeah. As we say, it was a working man's harbor.
Absolutely.
Back in the 100 years and more ago.
That's right.
Yeah. Well, after we left the bridge area, the harbor area, Mike, we headed up Cabot Street, and we stopped in front of the Little Peach variety store and took
Yes.
a shot looking north up on Cabot Street.
That's right.
And that was of some interest because we found out that the house in the old picture is still standing, and as we're looking
Yes.
at the new shot that we took, it almost looks not quite the same, but
Well,
can see
you
the
know it's the
resemblance.
same spot.
Right.
Yeah.
Further up, we stopped by the Historical Society, which is there, of course, today. But in the early days, of course, that was the National Bank, and
That's
before
right.
that, one of the Cabot brothers had it
Yeah.
as a private residence.
And even today, if you look at a shot today, some of the buildings have been fixed up a little bit, but basically it looks the same.
Yeah. There are many viewpoints, vantage points, if you look down Cabot Street, that you can see Beverly almost as it was 100 years ago or 150 years
That's
ago.
right.
Some of the landmarks are still there, as we'll see. We mentioned also, Mike, that the trees that grew along the side of the road in those days were kind of large and imposing. in
Yes,
some
a lot of
ways.
the elm trees, and of course we lost a lot of the elms with the Dutch elm disease.
Right.
It's nice to see new trees being planted today,
Yep.
and probably in a few years it'll even look more like it used to look with larger trees there.
The corner of Washington Street. This is a building that closely resembles the way that the old photograph.
That hasn't changed
yet,
much.
Of course, we all remember Alcon's department store in the
That's
corner
right.
here, and the various other billiard parlors and
Yes,
ice cream parlors and bowling alleys and
And
what have you.
the old Strand Theater.
Right. Then as we went heading north again on Cabot Street, we got a look at what was the old commercial building, commercial block as it was
Yes.
called. And that, of course, burned away in a fire back in the, was it the 60s or 70s?
I think it was in the 60s, and that was quite a fire too.
Yeah.
There were two big fires there. Right next door to that was Carl's Hardware, and that burned in the middle of the day. And I believe that was, I want to say that was in 1958, and it was in the middle of the afternoon when there was a tremendous explosion, and it just blew the whole front of that building off.
Right. Then across the street, we're looking at what was the Endicott block, but no longer is there. And we're looking down toward what is now the Warren 5-cent Savings Bank.
Yes.
And then we turned the camera around, Mike, and we headed south, back down toward the bridge, and we got a look at the Peabody building, which is on the right
Yes.
by the corner of Milton Street.
Uh-huh.
And we suggested that little block of stores there hadn't changed much
It hasn't.
over the last 100-odd
That
years.
that looks almost exactly the same today as it
Right.
did then.
Absolutely. And another picture showing, again, in a northerly direction here down Cabot Street, probably taken by the foot of Milton Street, and we can see the City Hall at the distance, and Whitcomb Carter's
Yes,
over on the left.
That's right, the hardware store with the creaky floor. I always remember the creaky floor. I used to walk down the aisle, the floor would creak. I can remember walking down with my father, and you'd go into the aisle and buy nails in these huge bins. And I can always remember the floor creaking. I don't know why.
And you told
Sticks in
me
my-
that I had realized that Whitcomb Carter's was located down in and around the Rogers building.
Yes, and then it moved.
It moved up to the corner of Broadway and Cabot. Then we got a look at City Hall as it looked over 100 years ago, and we note that there was a fourth floor
Yes,
on the building in those days,
a large function hall for dances, graduations, etc.
with two entrances, a
Yes.
side entrance on Thorndike Street. And we, again, kind of turned over toward Bow Street, and we just caught a glimpse of the famous iron rail fence that surrounded St. Peter's Church.
Yep, that was the hangout.
According to the old timers, this is
Yeah,
where the young
that's where the
folks
action was.
would be on a Saturday night to watch the parade
Watch
and
the parade.
people strolling by.
Right.
And again, we're looking, let's see, in a southerly direction, perhaps just below City Hall, back at the Oddfellows building,
Yeah.
and we see what is now the Warren 5-cent Bank there in the
Right.
distance. And the next view that we saw, what program one, Mike, was again a look at Cabot Street with trolley cars in a northerly direction.
Yes.
With the Baptist Church on the right.
On the right-hand side about it, Cabot Street, looking down Cabot. And you can see the two trolley cars, one trolley car waiting for the other to pass. It was a bypass system.
The big fire at the Baptist Church in 1975, I believe, really changed the facade of that building.
It changed that whole block from Abbott Street to Hale Street.
Yep.
Because the gas and electric building and the trust company building and Disjardins and so on was all gone. And the Baptist Church used that whole block for their new property.
Yeah. I recall Reverend John Wilbur was the man down there at that time, and he wasted little time in getting the church back up on its feet.
That's correct.
The new building.
That's right.
Was
they
to
were
rise
able to save
shortly
the
thereafter.
steeple, I believe, in that fire.
This next photograph, postal card, is one of my favorites, Mike, because we can see how Cabot Street looked from basically what we now know as Ellis Square, and off on the right, where the building which used to house the 5 and 10 cent store, there was a family residence there, the Ellingwood House.
Yes, that's one of my favorite pictures, and it really shows how beautiful Beverly was downtown at that particular time. And you can appreciate the size of that Rogers building, which was really quite a landmark in Beverly at that time. It was probably one of the most famous buildings in Beverly after it was built.
Yeah.
Probably because the person was from Boston, and it had a marble staircase going upstairs, and it had an extra floor on it, and the top floor was used for functions, for banquets, for gatherings and so on. And then of course they had a fire in the 30s there.
Yeah.
And the top floor was taken off.
Yeah. I remember going in there for the Beverly Credit Union, had its offices.
That's right, on the second floor.
Second floor there.
Yeah.
Ellen Quigley, I guess, was in charge back in those days. And of course we've neglected to mention the Oddfellows building, which was put up, Mike, in what, 1875?
It was built in, well, it was dedicated September 8th, 1875. And it cost $65,000 to build that building at that time. And that was a very popular building too. The post office was located in back of it. The bottom floor was taken up with retail shops, and the upstairs part of it was the lodge and the functions of the Elks.
Later on the Broadway side, Western Union would have their
Western
office
Union
there
had
too.
an office there, and the Oddfellows kept that building up until the time they bought the church on the corner of Charnock and Pierce Avenue. I think they was a Swedish church, is what Mr. Bada, I interviewed him one time, and he referred to it as the Swedish church, and that's where the lodge has a lot of their papers even today.
Oh.
So if somebody was interested in finding out more information about the building itself, they could probably go to the somebody who was in the Oddfellows, and maybe in the vault could find the information.
I wonder whoever came up with the name Oddfellows, Mike.
I don't know. It's just these benevolent associations have names like, well, you've got elks and moose and.
Correct. Oh, and one more picture here. We left. We actually finished program one with a look at the Unitarian Church.
Yes.
Another nice picture here that we're looking at. This was probably taken around the turn of the century, I would say, Mike.
I think that was taken around the turn of the century, and it looks from that picture as though the photographer was standing probably in front of the Lee and Cressy building.
Yep.
And that Lee and Cressy building was built in 1897. It actually opened January 1st. I'm sorry, it opened January 1st, 1897, that's right. And it was 40 by 80. And it was built for Israel Lee and Freeborn Cressy, located at 232 Cabot Street. And it opened as a furniture store. And they gave up the furniture business and went into the undertaking business. But it wasn't strictly undertaking. It was undertaking and upholstery and shades. So they kept the upholstery and the shades going. If any of the viewers are interested, the edition of the Beverly Citizen, I believe it was June 29th, 1900, has a profile of the businesses on Cabot Street, and they do a profile of the Lee and Cressy building, of Samuel Gently, of some of the apothecaries on the street. It's really quite interesting.
Fremont Cressy, I believe, was a mayor, became mayor of Beverly.
Yeah.
Back right after the
He
first.
was involved in politics as an alderman, and then later on as a mayor.
Right. And as we said in program one, this all evolved into the Lee Moody funeral business.
That's right.
On the corner of Dane and Knowlton
Street.
And of course today it's the Lee Moody
Russell. That's correct.
Funeral parlor.
Yeah, which used to be the parish house for the Dane Street Congregational Church.
Okay. All right, Mike, let's show our viewers some more of your wonderful postal cards here. We're going to take an aerial view here of downtown, well, Ellis Square, as it was later to be called.
Yes. This view is taken from the top of the Oddfellows building. There's a small room at the very top of the building which gives you an overall view of Beverly and the sea, the ocean, to the west, north, south, and east. And in fact, during the Second World War, it was used as a lookout for enemy planes during the Second World War. And since it was such a high building, when they were taking these postcard pictures, that would make an interesting picture to take. And so that's probably one of the most popular pictures of Beverly, is that aerial view from the top of the Oddfellows building.
We know it was taken after 1905 or 06 because we see the St. Mary's Church there, which was, I think, dedicated in and about that time.
Yes, that's right.
So this could have well been like 1910 or thereabouts.
I want to say it would be about 1910.
And with the trolley tracks running right down the center of Beverly, we could see the turnout, Mike, where you could pass. One car could pass another in front of the Baptist church, and then we see the tracks splitting off in Ellis Square.
Ellis Square, right. One of the tracks would take Route 22 down toward Essex, and the other track would take down Cabot Street, and then it would branch off again down Elliott, and then it would continue on up into North Beverly.
Yeah. Actually, for a while, the trolley service ran right into Wenham and then into Hamilton.
Yes.
And I think in the 1920s, they discontinued that service. And the trolley branch stopped down at Gloucester Crossing, I think was the outer limit.
Yeah,
but for a while you could go straight through to Hamilton.
Yes.
On the trolley.
I know that the trolley ran up through North Beverly because that was one of the things that used to drive the conductor crazy on the trolley would be when some of the kids get out of school, they get on the trolley car and they get up by the Shore Country Day School. And the boys in the back of the trolley would start jumping, and they'd derail a trolley car. That's one of the old stories that went around at that time.
Kids will be kids, huh?
I guess. Hasn't changed much.
Now, this next photograph here, actually it was a photograph. It was taken in 1874, according to the article that I have here.
Yes.
But, Mike, you have a story to go along
I have
with.
a story. And I want the viewers to understand that this is a true story. That first picture the previous picture that we saw, the aerial view of Beverly, has always fascinated